May 4th, 1945, 07:30 hours, Kufstein, Austria. Captain Jack Lee sat atop his Sherman tank, besotting Jenny, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A German Wehrmacht officer was driving toward his position in a Kubelwagen, the German equivalent of a jeep, waving a white flag so vigorously it looked like he might dislocate his shoulder. Lee's gunner swiveled the turret, tracking the approaching vehicle. "Sir, what do you want us to do?" Lee held up his hand. "Hold fire. Let's see what this is about." The German officer, his uniform immaculate despite 5 years of war, his iron cross gleaming in the morning sun, pulled to a stop 30 feet from the Sherman. He stepped out, hands visible, and called out in heavily accented English, "Captain, I am Major Josef Gangl of the Wehrmacht. I have not come to surrender. I have come to ask for your help." Lee climbed down from his tank, hand on his sidearm. "Help? You do realize we're in the middle of a war, right?" "A war that is ending," Gangl replied. "Hitler is dead, Germany is finished, but there are Frenchmen, important Frenchmen, imprisoned in a castle near here. The SS knows where they are. They are coming to execute them before the Americans can reach them. If you do not help me, these men will be murdered in the next 24 hours. Lee stared at the German officer. 5 days ago, they would have been trying to kill each other. Now this man was asking him to fight alongside Germans against other Germans. "You're asking me to trust you?" "No," Gangl said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust that even enemies can share a common cause when something is more important than enmity. Those prisoners must survive. History requires it." This is the story of the Battle of Castle Itter, the strangest battle of World War II. It's the only known battle where Americans and Germans fought side by side, where former prime ministers fought with rifles, where a tennis star became a hero, and where the lines between friend and enemy dissolved in the face of a greater evil. It's a story about courage in chaos, about redemption in war's final moments, and about how the right thing sometimes requires the most impossible alliances. The Castle of Contradictions. Castle Itter perches on a hillside above the small Austrian village of Itter in Tyrol, about 5 kilometers from the town of Wörgl. The castle existed as a fortress since at least the 13th century and was rebuilt in 1532. By the 20th century, it had been converted into a hotel, offering alpine views and mountain air to wealthy travelers. That peaceful existence ended in 1940 when Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss. The castle was rented out to the German government, and in 1943 it came under the administrative control of Dachau concentration camp, transformed into something unprecedented, a luxury prison for VIP prisoners. The SS called it Prominentenlager, a camp for the prominent. But calling Castle Itter a concentration camp would be misleading. The prisoners occupied cells converted from hotel guest rooms and had a service staff from Dachau. They had adequate food and were free to walk within their compound. The guards treated the French prisoners with what one captive described as a mixture of brute force, politeness, and occasional attempts at friendship. There was a library, a courtyard with a 13th century fountain, and decent meals. It was gilded captivity, but captivity nonetheless. The prisoners themselves represented a who's who of French political and military leadership, men who had shaped the fate of nations and now found themselves powerless spectators to history's final act. Former Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud were both there, despite being bitter political enemies. Daladier had signed the Munich Agreement alongside Neville Chamberlain in 1938, appeasing Hitler by allowing Germany to seize Czechoslovakia. Reynaud had opposed the agreement and later refused to support an armistice with Germany when France fell in 1940. Also imprisoned were Generals Maurice Gamelin and Maxime Weygand, the former having unsuccessfully commanded French forces during Germany's 1940 invasion, the latter having replaced him only to surrender to the Germans. They barely spoke to each other. Trade union leader Léon Jouhaux, tennis star Jean Borotre, right-wing leader Colonel François de la Roque, and Marie-Agnès Caillot, Charles de Gaulle's sister, rounded out this unlikely collection of prisoners who ate at separate tables and nursed decades-old political grudges even in captivity. They were valuable hostages, kept alive for potential negotiations or prisoner exchanges. But by May 1945, as Germany collapsed, their value transformed from strategic to existential. They knew too much. They had witnessed too much. And the SS didn't want witnesses. The collapse. By early May 1945, Nazi Germany existed in name only. Hitler was dead, having killed himself in his bunker in Berlin. Mussolini had died days prior, his body strung up by partisans. Soviet forces occupied Berlin, American armies swept across Bavaria. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and was breathing its last. But in chaos, the most dangerous men thrive. Elements of the 17th Waffen-SS Panzer Grenadier Division had been ordered to descend on Castle Itter and execute all prisoners who remained there. These weren't defeated soldiers ready to surrender. They were fanatics who believed that eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence was their final duty to the Führer. On May 2nd, Dachau's commandant fled to Castle Itter as the camp was being liberated by US troops, but he committed suicide. 2 days later, Castle Itter's own commandant and camp guards abandoned their posts, leaving the prisoners in charge but unable to leave because hostile Germans remained nearby. The prisoners found themselves in a surreal position, free but trapped. The castle sat in territory still crawling with SS units, executing anyone suspected of collaboration or desertion. German soldiers who surrendered were being hanged from lampposts with signs reading "traitor" around their necks. The roads teemed with desperate refugees, deserting soldiers, and fanatics determined to fight to the last. For elderly politicians and generals, escape on foot through hostile territory was suicide. They needed help. They needed rescue. And time was running out. Zvonimir Chuchkovic, an imprisoned Yugoslav communist resistance member from Croatia, who worked as a handyman at the prison, left the castle under the pretext of performing an errand. He went to seek Allied assistance, pressing on up the Inn River Valley toward Innsbruck, 64 kilometers distant. Late that evening, he reached the outskirts of the city and encountered an advance party of the 409th Infantry Regiment of the American 103rd Infantry Division and informed them of the castle's prisoners. At dawn, a heavily armored rescue was mounted, but was stopped by heavy shelling just past Jenbach, around halfway to Itter, then recalled by superiors for encroaching into territory of another US division. The prisoners, unaware that Chuchkovic's mission had been stymied by military bureaucracy, sent a second emissary. The German who defected. Andreas Krobot, the castle cook, encountered Major Josef Sepp Gangl, a Wehrmacht officer who had given up the Nazi cause and was leading a small band of German soldiers. Josef Gangl was 41 years old, a career soldier who had joined the Austrian army in the 1920s and found himself absorbed into the Wehrmacht when Germany annexed Austria. He had fought in Poland, France, and Russia, earning decorations for valor. But by May 1945, Gangl had seen enough. He had witnessed atrocities that haunted him. He had watched the SS execute civilians for minor infractions. He had seen Germany's senseless destruction in its death throes. When Hitler issued the Nero Decree, ordering the destruction of all German infrastructure, including cultural treasures, Gangl made his decision. He contacted the Austrian resistance in Wörgl, offering his services and those of his men. About 20 Wehrmacht soldiers followed him, choosing potential execution for desertion over continuing to fight for a regime they no longer believed in. When Andreas Krobot arrived on his bicycle, gasping out the situation at Castle Itter, Gangl immediately understood both the danger and the opportunity. These French prisoners represented Europe's political future. If they died, post-war France would be radically different. Their survival mattered beyond military calculations. It was about preserving the possibility of reconstructing civilization after madness. But Gangl had perhaps 24 men, mostly exhausted soldiers with limited ammunition. He only had around 20 loyal men under his command, nowhere near enough to face the hundreds of SS troops patrolling the area. The SS force heading toward Itter numbered over 100 battle-hardened fanatics with heavy weapons. Gangl needed help, American help. He climbed into his Kubelwagen and drove toward the sound of American tank engines. What he was about to do, approach enemy soldiers, ask for their aid, propose fighting alongside them, was unprecedented. It was also the only option that made sense. The American who listened. First Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee, Jr. was 27 years old, from Norwich, New York. Stocky, practical, and thoroughly uninterested in glory, Lee commanded Company B of the 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division. For 5 months, he had led his tankers across France and into Germany, fighting in what everyone knew were the war's final days. On the morning of May 4th, Lee's column had paused near Kufstein while he studied maps and tried to determine his next objective. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. Nobody wanted to die in these last pointless hours. When the German officer appeared with his white flag, Lee's initial instinct was suspicious. Was this a trap? Some desperate German ploy to ambush American forces? But Gangl's earnestness was convincing. The Austrian resistance members with him vouched for his authenticity. And the story, prominent French prisoners about to be executed by the SS, had the ring of desperate truth. Lee radioed his headquarters, requesting permission to mount a rescue operation. The response was bureaucratic frustration. Castle Itter sat in another division's operational area. He lacked authorization. The chain of command was unclear in the chaos of war's end. Lee made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed under different circumstances. He would go anyway. If the prisoners mattered as much as Gangl claimed, then regulations could sort themselves out later. Men's lives, important men's lives, hung in the balance. En route, Lee was forced to send reinforcements back when a bridge proved too flimsy for the entire group to cross. Leaving one of his tanks behind to guard it, he set off accompanied only by 14 American soldiers, Gangl, a driver, and a truck carrying 10 former German artillerymen. 6 kilometers from the castle, they defeated a party of SS troops that had been attempting to set up a roadblock. The brief firefight left 3 SS dead and confirmed Gangl's warnings. Fanatics were moving toward Itter with hostile intent. When Lee's small convoy arrived at Castle Itter on the afternoon of May 4th, he found the French prisoners armed with weapons, abandoned by their guards, and nervously manning defensive positions. The French prisoners greeted the rescuing force warmly, but were disappointed with its small size. Paul Reynaud, the former Prime Minister, approached Lee with evident concern. "Captain, this is your entire force? We were hoping for at least a company." Lee surveyed the castle with a tanker's tactical eye. Stone walls, elevated position, clear fields of fire, limited approaches. "Sir, this castle has defended itself for 700 years. With proper preparation, we can hold it until relief arrives. Meanwhile, the French prisoners had asked an SS officer, Kurt Siegfried Schrader, whom they had befriended during his convalescence from wounds and who was living locally, to take charge of their defense. Schrader was a paradox, an SS captain who had come to reject Nazi ideology after witnessing its horrors. He had recovered from combat wounds at Castle Itter, where the French prisoners treated him with kindness that contrasted sharply with SS doctrine. Their humanity had cracked his indoctrination. Schrader would also situate his family within the castle to protect them as well as the French POWs. Now Lee commanded perhaps the strangest military unit ever assembled: 14 American soldiers, roughly 20 Wehrmacht defectors, one SS officer who had rejected Nazism, and a collection of elderly French politicians and generals, some of whom hadn't held weapons in decades. The night before, Lee immediately organized the castle's defense with methodical precision. His Sherman tank, Besotten Jenny, was positioned to cover the main gate, its 75mm cannon and 50 caliber machine gun providing the defenders' heaviest firepower. American and German soldiers were mixed into firing positions along the walls, paired up despite language barriers and recent enmity. The French prisoners, despite Lee's orders to remain in shelter, insisted on participating. Lee had ordered the French prisoners to hide, but they remained outside and fought alongside the American and Wehrmacht soldiers. General Maxime Weygand, who had commanded all French forces in 1940, helped Lee position a 30 caliber machine gun. Jean Barotre, the tennis champion nicknamed the Bounding Basque for his athletic prowess, moved between positions with ammunition. Even the elderly former prime ministers handled rifles with the rusty competence of men who had fought in World War I decades earlier. The atmosphere was surreal. American and German soldiers who'd been trying to kill each other days ago now shared cigarettes and attempted communication through gestures and broken phrases. "Kameraden?" one German soldier asked tentatively. "Yeah, buddy," an American tanker replied. "For tonight, Kameraden." Political enemies worked side by side. Reynard and Daladier, who hadn't spoken civilly in years, coordinated ammunition distribution. General Gamelin and General Weygand, whose mutual contempt was legendary, planned defensive sectors together. As darkness fell, the defenders were harried by a reconnaissance force sent to assess their strength and probe the fortress for weaknesses. SS troops crept close to the walls, testing response times, noting defensive positions, searching for vulnerabilities. Sporadic gunfire echoed through the night. Flares briefly illuminated the castle walls. German machine gun fire rattled against stone. The reconnaissance withdrew before dawn, having learned what they needed to know. Inside the castle, defenders grabbed fitful sleep in shifts, knowing what morning would bring. Before the main assault began, Gangl was able to phone Alois Meyer, the Austrian resistance leader in Wörgl, and ask for reinforcements. Only 2 more German soldiers under his command and a teenage Austrian resistance member, Hans Voltel, could be spared, and they quickly drove to the castle. 3 additional defenders against over 100 attacking SS. The mathematics of survival looked grim. Lee assembled his defenders as dawn approached. "Gentlemen, Americans, Germans, Frenchmen, today we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to fight together against a common enemy. I don't care about your politics, your past, or your reasons for being here. All that matters is that we hold this castle until relief arrives. Can we do that?" A chorus of agreements in 3 languages answered him. The battle begins. On May 5, in the morning, 150 Waffen-SS launched an attack. A force led by Oberführer Georg Bochmann, who had been occupying some hills near the town, decided to attack the castle. The SS emerged from the tree line at 0400 hours, black-clad figures carrying Sturmgewehr assault rifles, MG-42 machine guns, and Panzerfausts. Despite the state of the German military, they had plenty of guns, trucks, and even an 88mm gun. Lee watched through binoculars as the SS deployed with military precision. "They're not half-starved conscripts," he reported to Gangl. "These are professionals." The 88mm gun, the legendary German anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapon that had destroyed countless Allied tanks, was positioned on high ground with clear line of sight to the castle gate. Its crew began ranging fire, adjusting their aim methodically. "Everyone down!" Lee shouted. The first 88mm shell screamed overhead and exploded against the castle's upper wall. Stone fragments sprayed across the courtyard. The castle shook from machine gun fire and anti-aircraft shells to such an extent that some bricks began to collapse, one hitting and injuring Schrader's wife. "Besotten Jenny!" roared to life. Lee's gunner traversed the turret toward the 88mm position and fired. The Sherman's shell exploded short, showering the SS gun crew with dirt. They immediately relocated, demonstrating the tactical competence that made them so dangerous. The SS infantry advanced in rushes, using covering fire to bound forward. More than 100 SS troops appeared out of the woods. American tankers, Wehrmacht soldiers, and French politicians all fired back at them. The sound was overwhelming. German MG-42s firing at 1,200 rounds per minute, American 50 calibers answering in deep stuttering bursts, rifles crackling, grenades exploding. Jean Barotre sprinted along the walls, delivering ammunition to defenders who were burning through their supply with alarming speed. General Weygand, 77 years old, fed belts into a 30 caliber machine gun while an American sergeant fired controlled bursts at advancing SS troops. "Faster, General!" the American shouted. Weygand snapped back in French accented English. "Young man, I was fighting Germans before you were born." The SS concentrated fire on Besotten Jenny, recognizing the tank as the defenders' heaviest weapon. Panzerfaust rockets streaked toward the Sherman, exploding against the castle walls. Lee's crew fought desperately, suppressing SS positions one by one. Then disaster struck. Lee's tank provided support until it was destroyed by German fire from an 88mm gun. The high-velocity shell punched through the Sherman's armor in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The crew bailed out moments before ammunition cooked off inside, secondary explosions tearing through the tank's interior. Besotten Jenny was dead. The defenders had lost their heaviest firepower. The SS, sensing advantage, pressed their attack. Black-clad figures surged toward the main gate. Wehrmacht machine gunners fired until their barrels glowed red. American riflemen shot with methodical precision. Even the elderly French prisoners contributed. Edouard Daladier, who had signed the Munich Agreement trying to appease Hitler, now fired at SS troops with grim determination. But ammunition was running critically low. The defenders had burned through supplies at unsustainable rates. Magazines emptied faster than they could be reloaded. Machine gun belts ran dry. The 50 caliber on the destroyed Sherman sat useless, its ammunition inaccessible in the burning wreck. Lee assessed their situation with mounting desperation. The 142nd Infantry Regiment had been notified and was en route, but still miles away. The defenders might have another hour of fighting capacity, maybe less. After that, they'd be reduced to hand-to-hand combat against overwhelming numbers. The SS knew it too. Their commander committed his reserves, launching a final coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the depleted defenders before American reinforcements arrived. The sacrifice. Major Joseph Gangl moved through the chaos with calm purpose, directing defensive fire, encouraging his men, both German and American, and ensuring the French prisoners remained relatively protected. He saw former Prime Minister Reynaud taking potshots at the SS over the parapet. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw an SS man raise his rifle on the bridge below. Gangl sprinted, shoving the Frenchman out of the way, but as he did so, he took the bullet to the head. Gangl died during the battle from a 7.92 by 57mm Mauser round while trying to move former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud out of harm's way. He fell instantly, killed by the same type of rifle carried by men wearing his uniform. A Wehrmacht major killed by the SS while defending French politicians alongside American soldiers. The absurdity and nobility of his death encapsulated everything strange about this battle. An American soldier dragged Gangl's body to cover while continuing to fire. Paul Reynaud knelt beside the dead German, tears streaming down his face. "He saved my life," Reynaud said to no one in particular. "An enemy saved my life." Gangl's death galvanized the defenders with fury. His German soldiers fought with renewed intensity, shouting his name as they fired. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Gangl had defected from the Wehrmacht to fight alongside Americans and died protecting Frenchmen from Germans. He was the sole defender to die during the battle, though 4 others were wounded. The tennis stars run. With ammunition nearly exhausted and relief still distant, the defenders faced annihilation. Someone needed to reach the 142nd Infantry and guide them to Castle Itter before the SS overran the defences. Tennis star Jean Barotre offered to vault the wall and run through a labyrinth of enemy soldiers, which Lee accepted. Barotre managed to get through unscathed, requested a uniform, and then joined the resistance force as it made its way towards the prison just before the defenders were out of ammo. Jean Barotre was 56 years old, but he'd been one of the world's greatest tennis players, winner of Wimbledon, the French Open, and countless other championships. The athleticism that made him famous now became tactical advantage. He studied the terrain beyond the castle walls, noting SS positions and dead ground where their fire couldn't reach. "I can do this," he told Lee. "I played on centre court at Wimbledon. This is just another match." At 15:30 hours, Barotre climbed to the top of the wall. Below, SS troops prowled between positions, scanning for threats. Lee provided covering fire as Barotre vaulted over the wall with the grace of an Olympic athlete, landed in a roll, and sprinted toward the tree line. SS troops shouted and opened fire. Bullets kicked up dirt around Barotre's feet as he ran with zigzagging unpredictability, moving like he was dodging tennis serves at 100 miles per hour. He dove behind a boulder, waited for a lull in fire, then sprinted again. He disappeared into the forest. Whether he'd survived or been hit, the defenders couldn't tell. They could only hope and continue fighting. Inside Castle Itter, ammunition counters dropped toward 0. Lee ordered defenders to make every shot count, to fire only at confirmed targets, to prepare for hand-to-hand combat if necessary. The SS sensed victory. Their attack intensified, confident that the defenders' fire was slackening due to ammunition depletion rather than tactical discipline. The relief arrives. At 1600 hours, a sound cut through the battle noise, the deep rumble of American tank engines approaching at full speed. The relief force, arriving around 4 p.m., defeated the SS, taking close to 100 prisoners. Elements of the 142nd Infantry Regiment, guided by the exhausted but triumphant Jean Barotre, arrived with tanks, half-tracks, and fresh infantry. The SS, caught between the castle's defenders and the arriving American force, attempted to withdraw. American tanks opened fire, blocking escape routes. Infantry swept through the woods, systematically clearing SS positions. Within 30 minutes, organized SS resistance collapsed. Black-clad figures emerged from cover with hands raised. The battle-hardened fanatics who had fought to execute prisoners now surrendered meekly to overwhelming force. American MPs rounded them up, searching them for weapons and securing them in trucks. Inside Castle Itter, defenders slowly emerged from positions, stunned that they'd survived. American and German soldiers embraced, Political enemies shook hands, and elderly Frenchmen sat exhausted against stone walls. Lee surveyed the battlefield. His tank was destroyed, one German major lay dead, 4 defenders had been wounded, but they'd held. Against overwhelming odds, with minimal ammunition, this impossible alliance had defended the castle until relief arrived. The French prisoners were evacuated that evening, beginning their journey home. The French prisoners were evacuated to France that evening, reaching Paris on time in May. They would return to France as heroes, resume political careers, and shape post-war Europe's future. Lives preserved by the strangest alliance of the war. The aftermath. For his service defending the castle, Lee was promoted to captain and received the Distinguished Service Cross, the United States military's second highest decoration for valor. He died in 1973, having lived nearly 3 decades after his moment of impossible courage. Gangl was honored as an Austrian national hero. A street in Wörgl was named after him. His widow received his military decorations posthumously, and Austrian schoolchildren learned his story, the Wehrmacht officer who died defending Allied interests against German fanaticism. Kurt Siegfried Schrader received a 2-year sentence after he was arrested and charged by US forces for his former affiliation with the Nazi Party. His sentence was shortened in respect to his efforts at Itter. He lived quietly in Austria after his release, rarely discussing the battle that had defined his life's meaning. The French prisoners returned to prominence. Daladier resumed his political career as a member of the French Chamber of Deputies from 1946 to 1958. Reynaud was elected in 1946 as a member of the Chamber of Deputies and was appointed to several cabinet positions in the post-war period. Their policies and leadership helped shape modern France, their survival at Itter having consequences far beyond one small battle. Jean Barotre returned to tennis administration and lived until 1994, always maintaining that his sprint through enemy fire was less frightening than facing a championship point serve at Wimbledon. He was 95 when he died, having witnessed nearly the entire 20th century. Popular accounts of the battle have dubbed it the strangest battle of World War II. The battle was fought 5 days after Adolf Hitler had committed suicide and only 2 days before the signing of Germany's unconditional surrender. Epilogue. What it means. Castle Itter stands today as a private residence, its walls bearing no obvious scars from the battle fought there. Tourists photograph it from the village below, mostly unaware of the extraordinary events that unfolded on May 5, 1945. But historians recognize the Battle of Castle Itter as something profound, a moment when the rigidity of warfare dissolved, when enemies recognized a greater enemy, when the future mattered more than the past. It demonstrated truths that challenged comfortable narratives about World War II. Not all Germans were Nazis. Not all soldiers continued fighting for lost causes. When presented with moral clarity, defending innocents against murderers, even sworn enemies could become allies. Major Joseph Gangl made a choice that cost him his life. He could have hidden, surrendered to Americans, or fled Austria entirely. Instead, he fought to protect people he'd never met because their survival represented something larger than military victory. It represented the possibility that civilization might be reconstructed after barbarism. Captain Jack Lee violated orders, risked his career, and led his men into an impossible situation because he understood that some things transcend military hierarchy. Those French prisoners weren't just elderly politicians, they were symbols of European democracy, witnesses to history, and architects of the post-war world. The French prisoners themselves transcended lifelong political enmities when survival demanded cooperation. Reynaud and Daladier, Gamelin and Weygand, left-wing unionists and right-wing nationalists, all set aside grievances when facing extinction. The Wehrmacht soldiers who followed Gangl into defection risked execution for desertion. The SS officer who rejected his ideology and protected prisoners demonstrated that indoctrination isn't absolute, that humanity can penetrate even the most poisonous ideologies. And Jean Barotre, the tennis star, proved that courage comes in unexpected packages. Sometimes athletic ability saves lives as effectively as military training. Stephen Harding, author of The Last Battle, which chronicled Castle Itter extensively, observed, "If the SS had managed to get into the castle and kill all these French VIPs, the history of post-war France would have been radically different. These prisoners formulated the policies that carried France into the 21st century." The battle lasted approximately 12 hours. One German major died, 4 defenders were wounded. Approximately 100 SS troops were killed or captured. These statistics barely capture the battle's significance. In those 12 hours, enemies became allies, political opponents became comrades, a castle became a symbol of possibility. The possibility that even in war's darkest moments, humanity might choose cooperation over conflict, protection over murder, future over past. The absurdity of the situation, Americans and Germans fighting together against other Germans to protect Frenchmen in an Austrian castle, somehow crystallized war's essential madness and humanity's redemptive capacity. 5 days after Hitler's suicide, 2 days before Germany's surrender, when the war's outcome was certain and further bloodshed pointless, men still chose to fight for something meaningful. Not for territory or ideology, but for the simple principle that innocent lives deserved protection. Castle Itter was the war's last strange grace note, a reminder that even in mechanized, industrialized, totalized warfare, individual choices mattered. Gangel's choice to defect, Lee's choice to help, Barotre's choice to run, the prisoner's choice to fight, the German soldier's choice to follow Gangel into potential execution for desertion. Each choice cascaded into consequences, lives saved, history altered, futures preserved. The Battle of Castle Itter remains unique in military history. It is one of only 2 instances of German and American troops fighting together in WWII. No other battle in modern warfare so completely dissolved the boundaries between friend and enemy, between victor and vanquished, between past conflicts and future cooperation. It stands as testament to a profound truth that enemies are made by circumstance, politics, and propaganda, but allies can be forged by shared recognition of what matters most. On May 5, 1945, in a castle perched above an Austrian village, that's exactly what happened. Americans, Germans, and Frenchmen, enemies by every definition, became brothers in arms for one impossible day.